and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those unexpected, fascinating ripples that can change everything. Today's guest is someone whose entire career has been shaped by these subtle, powerful moments, Adam Margolin. Hi, Adam.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, good, thank you. Adam is a marketing strategist, brand consultant, and founder of a successful advisory business and fractional CMO. But his path wasn't carved by one giant leap. From General Mills to European athletic sponsorships to five-a-side football chats, Adam's story is a masterclass in how to turn curveballs into launchpads and why even the smallest stone thrown well can change everything. Adam, welcome to the show. Delighted to have you here.
Thanks.
Can you share with our listeners a little potted history of your career to date?
Absolutely. So I split my career into three parts. The first third was FMCG. Briefly at Unilever, where unlike yourself, I decided I didn't want to work in market research. And then I ended up at General Mills, where obviously we worked together on Old El Paso Mexican food for a few years. Then I went to work for United Biscuits on mini cheddars, twiglets and hula hoops. We'll come back to the ripples later, but then I ended up working for Spar, where I actually dragged you in again.
You did, yeah.
Then I went to work for McCall's Retail Group as their marketing director. And then there was another ripple, and I ended up starting my own business, which has now been going for the best part of 10 years, has taken on various guises, but primarily as a fractional CMO. So what was interesting is when we had a pre-chat, and what stuck with me is that all of the different things that have happened over the years tend to be lots of little ripples, little nudges that have then steered me in certain directions. Yeah. And that's what's most interesting about the job now. I also have here this little man, this person of continual respect was actually Laura's leaving gift to me when I left General Mills and has sat on my desk for now about 20 years. So,
I can't believe you still have that.
Well, he's the only one who gives me any respect. So that's all I've got.
Oh, I love that. Welcome to the show. Amazing to have you here. Can you quickly just explain what a fractional CMO is to anyone who has no idea what that is?
Absolutely. And actually, you say that. I did a post on it on LinkedIn not that long ago, and a few people commented going, oh, is that what you mean? I mean, in essence, it's a part-time marketing director. And then fractional CMO became much cooler. Basically, it means doing a part-time job. Beyond that, it's about who it's for. So it tends to be for companies that either aren't big enough or more often than not can't afford or don't need a full-time CMO. So to give you a little bit of context, someone will come to me and say, these are true stories. Can you help me hire a head of marketing? Out of interest, why a head of marketing? And they say, oh, I need someone who can do this, this, and this. And I said, well, the problem with a head of marketing role is they're slightly too senior to want to do all the doing that comes with a marketing role. Yeah. But they're probably not experienced enough to be a true strategy leader for the organization. So they're stuck in between the two. So the pitch really for where this started was, well, why don't you hire a solid marketing manager and a fractional CMO on a part-time basis? I'll set the strategy. I'll help develop the team, coach them. It will last 12 to 18 to 24 months. I'll then depart into the sunset, and you'll probably realize you don't need a full-time CMO, and the marketing manager can then handle things, and then occasionally I might need to dip in. So that's basically what it is for.
Amazing. Thank you. And we've wound straight to the end in terms of your current role, but can we start right at the beginning? What were the ripple moments that started it all for you? Were there curveballs? Was it conversations? How did you end up in this world of marketing?
So the beginning was relatively unripply. It's not a word, but you know what I mean.
We'll take it.
I did a business and maths degree. I split honours because I was good at maths, but I couldn't cope mentally with doing it just maths. So I did management studies. And within management studies, I did more marketing-based modules. Did a year in the States, did just marketing modules, really liked it. And did an internship at Unilever, decided I wanted to do marketing, and then thankfully got the job at General Mills. And that was kind of relatively smooth. I left General Mills, went to United Biscuits. And that's where I'd say was the first ripple in terms of my career. And it was a ripple actually that came out of frustration. So I was promised a promotion, as we often are. Spoke to my boss and her boss. And then a long story short, one went on maternity leave, the next one in maternity leave. I was jumping through hoops and eventually I just got fed up. So I spoke to a recruiter. Shout out to Gabby Rosenberg. I said to her, I want to work in toiletries, toys or food and stay in FMCG. And then she phoned me back a couple of weeks later and said, I've got a good role for you. It's in retail working for Spar. And I was like, well, I don't think that fits my brief at all. So thanks for listening. And she was like, no, I have listened because you don't really care where you work. It's more about autonomy, development, learning, growth. This is a good role for you. Trust me, just go on Friday for an interview. And I was like, all right, fine. Anyway, I went, she was right. I got the job. And then when I resigned, the senior marketing director at UB said, if I offer you 10 grand and a promotion, will you stay? And I was like, to be honest, no, because I've committed. But if you'd have offered me 3 grand a promotion 3 months ago when I wanted it, I'd never have looked for a new job.
It's a lesson for employers, though, isn't it? In terms of promised promotions and high performing talent that are ambitious and driven and want more, are hungry for it. And, you dangle the carrot for too long and good employees will leave and they will look, beyond their current remit.
And I've always said to people on that subject who work for me to say, look, if you're getting frustrated, let's have a conversation. I might not be able to help you. And I have had situations where I'm like, look, I can't, there's nowhere to promote you to. I can't give you any more money. And if you want to leave, I'll try and help you get a good new role because that's in your best interest. But if you resign without telling me, and then I'm like, well, how was I meant to know if you didn't tell me? That's super frustrating.
There's nothing you can do.
So that was, I guess, the first career ripple, which was probably driven by me being frustrated, and then effectively a recruiter who got to the core of what I really needed to do next. Then there were some mini ripples again, and then the next big ripple, I was working at Spa. I'd been there about 3.5, 4 years. I actually really liked Spa. I was happy there. And we got a new managing director and she was great. But it was that moment when I'm going to have to recommit to another 3 or 4 years if I'm going to stay at Spa. And I wasn't sure. I picked up management information as a department when someone retired. And they put me on a training course, which was meant to be about how to handle a team of 6 as opposed to a team of 3. And it got completely sidetracked. And basically, the key message that I got from the coaching, summarizing 90 minutes into one sentence, was basically get to the front of the bus or get off the bus. And I was like, okay. So they've observed that I'm not fully committed, which I wasn't because I was mulling things over. And it made me think, was I in the right seat? Was it time for a new journey? I wasn't really sure. And then alongside this, the trading director from Spa had left and joined McCall's retail group 12 months earlier. And a few weeks before this training session, I'd had a phone call from him saying, McCall's is looking for a new marketing director. Are you interested? And I was like, not really, but I don't mind having a chat. Anyway, genuinely true. I leave the training session where I've basically been told, get on the front of the bus or get off. And I get a phone call from the HR director at McCall's. And I was like, that's really bizarrely because it felt like another bus was possibly pulling right up alongside the bus I was on. And this was a whole proper ripple effect, right? So do I stay? Do I move? New challenges, new growth, different environment, different impact? And actually, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go with it. My learning was this was a nudge that came us from building good personal relationship with the trading director who went to another business, being open to being on that new bus, even though I wasn't necessarily actively looking. And then I ended up at McCall's. That was probably the biggest ripple that leads me up to today came from, because I was there for about 3.5 years and really enjoyed it, built up the team, built up the way we were doing things, had an interesting conversation with the new ops director to say, I don't know what to do because none of you are ready for the next step. She was like, well, you just have to tread water for a little while we catch up. And I was like, okay. And then a few days later, got called into the COO's office who basically said, oh, we're making your role redundant. And I was like, okay. Wow. And I didn't see it coming, but having told me and having had the conversation I'd had, I was like, okay, well, I can kind of see the logic. But it did feel like a massive stone had been dropped in my head on this pond. Very unsettling, very sudden, quite full of uncertainty. But I had 6 months garden leave, which was nice. And gave me a chance to reflect. And looking back, that moment made me step out of my comfort zone. I got to January 2016, and the honest truth is I didn't want to announce unemployment, so I announced self-employment. And then I was in kind of job processes and consultancy conversations. Long story short, ended up committing to doing Brand Champions, and that's nearly now 10 years ago. What started off as a potential setback set ripples in motion that I couldn't have anticipated, and has now allowed me to work with a whole range of clients, explore loads of different opportunities, and basically ripples turned into waves of change, which have a big impact on my working life and my personal life beyond, because obviously I now work more from home. I'm involved a bit more in stuff, which is great. It's a great example where it was probably a bigger ripple than a little one, but it did have a much bigger impact than I expected. So that's the career ripples, if you will.
I love that you talked about the little nudges into different currents, because sometimes, as you said, it's not necessarily this huge rock thrown into a pond. Sometimes it's listening and having your ears to the ground of these opportunities and then having the bravery just to go for it.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's not even bravery, right? I think sometimes you have to be pushed, or you have to have almost no other choice.
Yeah.
I've talked about running my own business for a while. Would I have ever done it? Would I have ever left corporate life if I wasn't made redundant? If I'd have got a job at the gym group as their marketing director, would I have stuck with that? As it happened, they rejected me and then they became my first client. So all these things, who knows, right? But actually you kind of forced into it. And then when it starts working, you're like, oh, that's great. Equally, I've got a friend who recently started his own business and now wants to go back corporately because it's just not for him. But I do think you've got to try stuff, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you can always change and move and do something different.
Would you go back to corporate now, or are you firmly in the entrepreneurial wave?
I don't like to say never. I mean, it's been a long time, so I'm not sure how well I would adhere to corporate life. And it would have to be an amazing role. But never say never. You never know.
Yeah. So you've worked across every kind of brand challenge, right, over the last few decades, especially for smaller brands who are trying to punch above their weight. What advice would you give them? Can you tell us a little bit more about smaller brands and founders and how you work with them to really address their brand challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back a step, actually. So one of the reasons my business is called Brand Champions is when we actually were at General Mills, their way of teaching targeting and proper marketing was a course called Brand Champions. And the way of General Mills targeting was they talk about these people, these advocates who are their brand champions. The way I describe it to people, and it fits actually very nicely with your ripple effect, and that's not intended clearly, but maybe you were influenced from your background at General Mills as well.
It was, because I know exactly the example you're going to give.
So I always talk to them and say, imagine your market as a pond, right? And every marketing action that you take is like dropping a stone in the pond, and the ripples are your influence, the awareness, the engagement, the impact that you create, whatever you're trying to do. And a lot of people think, you know what, the biggest way of making an impact, the secret, is to find the biggest stone possible, drop it in the pond, spend big, go broad, make a big splash. And that's fine if you're a massive business, right?
Yeah, and you've
but
got
even for massive businesses, that brings with huge amounts of wastage. And what I've learned and what I was taught and what I've seen work time and time again is it's not about one giant stone. It's about lots of smaller, well-placed stones, each one targeted at the right spot in the pond. Each stone then creates its own set of ripples. And when those ripples are aimed at the right people, your brand champions, the people who care, the people who are going to share your values, who advocate for your brand, who tell your stories, firstly, they have an impact. And secondly, they start to overlap and amplify. And that's when you start to build some real momentum. That philosophy is how I try and work with clients, a lot of which are small businesses. So it's about going, okay, stop wasting budget on mass marketing. Focus on understanding first and foremost, where you spent a lot of your career, who are those brand champions? What matters to them? Importantly, how are we going to reach them in ways that are personal, relevant, authentic, and build it up from there? So I would say the most common conversations I have with clients is who would need this product or service? Everybody, which is always not true, by the way. Okay, but who needs it the most? So who is likely to spend the most money with you or use you the most often, whatever? And that's where you carve it out. And then when you talk to them and they've got limited funds, you say, well, that's all you can do to start with, just that one thing. So, and then when you build up and you maximize it, then use your next set of funds to go to the next audience and build from there. So that's my big advice, is really understand your target audience and who your product or your service is for. And don't worry about making a massive impact in the market. You're not trying to take over in 1 minute. You need to build up and it will gradually grow.
And as you said, the amplification of multiple ripples and what that can do, because even big businesses that have big budgets and can do the big splash, that alone isn't enough even for big businesses, because one big splash, you know, I used to say when we launched innovation, don't launch it and leave it. It's all well and good doing one big splash and announcing a new product or a new service, but if you then don't do anything else, it becomes forgettable. So this constant dropping of the pebbles into the pond or the ocean, depending how big your pond is, and keeping that relevance and message alive is important for the big brands just as much as it is for the little brands. So I love that analogy.
Also, if you think about, you're not the only one in the pond.
Yeah.
Right. So there are other people dropping stones.
Yeah.
If their stones are bigger or more impactful, having that really clear positioning for a target audience is even more important. And you mentioned big brands. It's interesting actually, because even the big brands will often have, yeah, they might drop a big stone, but they'll often have lots of little targets, and it all comes back to understanding the audience. So we talked about Cheerios before, right? Just to pick out one example, obviously they drop a massive stone on mainstream breakfast cereal, but there were two smaller stones that have always interested me. One is a baby's first finger food. So they're targeting parents of children aged between probably 3 months and 9 months old.
Yeah.
But the channels they use to target those people are completely different. We're not talking mainstream television, we're talking Mumsnet and baby groups and nutritionalists and so on. And then the other one is over 65-year-old men with high cholesterol and heart issues, because Cheerios are high in fiber, ignoring the sugar, good for the heart, and are part of a high fiber diet. And again, what channels will they use? What messaging will they use? Which is completely different to the finger food and completely different to the cereal in the breakfast. So it's really interesting. Even those massive brands who are multiple millions in scale and multiple millions in spend are still using specific tactics to get to specific people. So if you take that and you make it on a small scale for small businesses, you don't have the benefit of having all the big money and the awareness and the brand name. You have no choice but to go there. And that's where I see so many businesses make mistakes of trying to compete with people they can't compete with.
Yeah, and spreading themselves too thin, spreading their resource too thin, because your analogy around child's first finger food and older generations, they're completely different ponds. You need to drop different stones, different messages, different targets, different channels, and do that really well rather than spreading yourself too thin.
But I don't know if you remember, do you remember when we were on working on Old El Paso, we profiled, you probably led this in Venice, we profiled the customer and her name was Emma.
Yes.
And we used Myers-Briggs to profile her. And from memory, she was an ESFP. And then
that's right.
Impressed, right? But then the interesting thing was we still bought adverts in Coronation Street. So having done all of that very clear insight, we still went the quickest and cheapest and most effective way of reaching that, even though the wastage is advert there. But then the content of the advert was tweaked and tailored to that person's insight. So it's not even always just about the channel. And sometimes you have to take the obvious market area or the channel that has got the biggest reach, but you can still change the message, still change the tone to match the target. So I was always these examples have always stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think, I remember that very clearly. Gosh, that was probably 20 odd years ago, which is terrifying. It shows how old we are, Adam. But I think what's so interesting about that is, TV is always this thing that is like either held up as the hero of marketing or it's been bashed as that's just the easy reach method. There's a constant cycle of the industry talking about whether TV's hot or not, but it's still an incredible reach mechanism. When you think about an omni-channel presence, if you have the budgets to do TV, the reach is incredible. But these days, when brands are trying to get attention in 1 second of a TikTok promotion, the channel spread and messaging is so different today than it was when we were building that for Old El Paso. I am sure there would still be a Coronation spot in the recommendation, but how you bring those messages into so many different
But I think
channels.
a lot of it's around and has always been around wastage, right? So if money was no object, you would spend on everything always all the time.
Yeah, always on.
Because that is what you would do. And then it becomes about wastage. So I remember at Spa, and again, this is probably working with you only really shop in a convenience store if you live or work within a mile. It's like 97%. And actually like 80% is within a quarter of a mile. And there are 2,500 spas in the UK. If you draw a mile radius around each one and then you look at how much of the population that covers, it's only like 15%.
Yeah.
Right? So actually, if you end up on TV, you're 85% wastage because no one will ever shop in that store because they don't live close enough. So it's really interesting when you compare the two, and actually it still might be the most efficient way of doing it, even with that amount of wasted. And I
you're jogging my memory now because we did the geolocation mapping by stores at Spa to look at the demographics around each different location, and it was absolutely fascinating because of course regionally it's going to be very different, but depending where that store was had such a massive impact on the range. And then convincing distributors and franchisees and different models that they need a different range because of that was always fascinating. So you're jogging my memory.
It's interesting because I've spent a lot of my career in what has become local marketing. So 8 years in convenience retail, which is basically within a mile. Within my consultancy, Gym Group, Energy Fitness, Anytime Fitness, probably 3 mile radius for a gym. Now I've got an education client, nursery is probably 1 to 2 mile radius. So actually it's all very well, these big things, but a lot of it becomes you draw a circle around it, and that's where you need to be most impactful.
And the power of local, right? And the power of relevance, because even if your topic is global sustainability and your market is genuinely the globe, it's still about how you make it feel small, right? And how you make it feel local and relevant and personal to me, not just the world more broadly. So I think that's a fabulous example. All right, so let's zoom in on the moment before the ripple. I want to know, how do you know a ripple's even happening? Because sometimes it's hindsight that you know something's had a big effect, but is there a flash of discomfort? Is it curiosity? Is it gut instinct? How do you recognize a ripple that is worth riding the wave of?
That is a brilliant question. I don't think most of the time you can, is my honest answer. So I think if it's a wave, so like redundancy in my case, right, that you know is going to have an impact. That's not so much a ripple as a massive, slap in the face. So stand up and, you take alert to that and you take notice. But I think majority, I think you're right. It's hindsight that is where a small decision or a conversation that effectively has this catalyst for setting off a chain of events. So I wanted to tell a story that's not related to work, actually, if I may.
Yeah.
So one of the scariest, most memorable ripple moments was not in a boardroom. It was actually on holiday. I was in Tel Aviv and I was swimming in the sea. And short version is we found ourselves caught in a riptide. And myself and my 2 kids, who were 15 and 13, probably a bit younger at the time. But we were happily swimming and jumping over waves. And then my son said, "Can we go back now?" And I said, "Yep, no problem." And we went to put our feet on the floor and there was no floor. And we were like, okay, this is bad. Helpfully chosen to do this at a point where all the lifeguards had left. So we're like, oh my God, what's going on here? So thankfully...
Was it just the 3 of you?
Just the 3 of us in obviously there were people on the beach, but just the 3 of my wife was sitting on the beach, soon to not be so happy, but happy at the time. The very positive part was that my son was still standing up, so he could walk back to the shore. And then my daughter and I we swam for like a good few seconds and basically got nowhere, and ended up holding onto a buoy in the sea quite far out from shore. And I'm like genuinely starting to panic because I don't know what we're doing. Like, do we just cling onto this buoy and hope someone saves
wait
us,
for someone to come?
Or do we go for it? So we're like, you know what, we're just going to have to make a sprint for it, effectively. So we go for it. And I go this way and she goes that way just because of the current. So I look up, she's nowhere near me. Now I'm literally expletive myself, because if she does struggle, get sucked under, whatever, I can't do anything about it. I'm not a strong enough swimmer anyway, probably, to do anything about it. Thankfully, she swims in the right direction and is a strong swimmer and breaks through and gets to standing up and then carries on to shore. And now I'm left and I'm a little bit more relaxed because both my children have survived and are on shore. But I am in the middle of nowhere. I'm now quite tired, to be honest with you. And I am of the view that I'm a bit screwed. So I decided to flip myself over onto my back and just float and consider, whilst planning my demise, what I'm going to do about this situation. And then what happened, interestingly, and I learned afterwards, this is what you're meant to do, but I didn't know this at the time, is that the tide takes you in its natural direction and you drift with it, and eventually it brings you back into the shore. And then you could stand up and walk back. And obviously I ended up hundreds of yards down the beach and kind of staggered back up to where I was. And I didn't know it was what you meant to do, but it was. You meant to kind of float, don't panic, trust that you're going to find your way out. And I kind of, not at the time because I was exhausted and quite emotional, but afterwards I was looking back and I thought it was an interesting example for this conversation about, ripples in particular, and that, the life or the business lesson is that sometimes you're caught in a current you can't control, whether that is redundancy or a project or, it's your phrase, throwing you a curveball. And the best thing you can do isn't to thrash around and exhaust yourself. It's actually to go with the flow, trust the process, and wait for the right moment to find your feet again. And I actually thought, from a life lesson point of view, actually, other than just teaching your listeners to learn how to survive a riptide, it's, to float and breathe and let it and kind of go with it.
Oh, you're giving me goosebumps. Like, I literally was on holiday with the girls last year, and it was the first time we'd all gone away together. I'm a stepmom of twin girls, and they said, "Oh, one of them was like, can we swim out to this boy?" I was like, right, lesson number 1 first, you're learning how to float. So you're actually making me get like proper goosebumps, because that is That is a terrifying story. Everyone, please learn water safety out at sea. Yeah, what an incredible lesson. Because as you said, trying to go against the current is exhausting, and you will only be able to do that so long. And that's in life, and that's in business, and that's in challenges, and how you can learn to ride the wave, float across the current, and as you said, know when to put your feet down. I think that's an incredible example. Wow. How on earth did you feel when you got back onto the beach?
Oh my God. So my wife's obviously on the shore.
Yeah.
My son's gone back to her. He's
because
crying.
obviously they would have
She's going
told her
ballistic.
what's going on.
Yeah, my daughter go out. Then he's got loads of people on the shore who were like, "Oh, this is happening. You can't do anything about it, etc., etc." So when I got back, I got absolutely yelled at and destroyed. Then I got hugged and kissed, but first I got yelled at. She was like, "You're so irresponsible." So all her emotion came out in aggression. We were meant to go out for dinner that evening. We just ordered like the equivalent of Uber into our hotel. My daughter did not sleep well. It took a good little bit of time. And actually, I forced her and him and myself, if I'm honest, to go back to the beach the next day and get back in the sea. We didn't go out as far, I'm not going to lie to you. But it was like, we have to get back on the horse, as the phrase goes. Otherwise, if that's the last memory they have of swimming in the sea, that will have a major impact on them. So we went back out and it was fine. Yeah, it was some big life and work lessons in there somewhere. Not at the time, but it's a good example of at the time you don't realize the thing you're learning, but afterwards you look back and go, I've learned a few things from this and they've been quite valuable actually.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because ripple impact things aren't always positive either, right? Sometimes they're negative things, sometimes they're difficult things, and knowing how to ride through that, and as you said, get back in the water.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think more often than not, they're negative. There's so many, the first moment is negative and then it becomes a positive because of what you make it. All the examples I've given, from made redundant, basically got told to get on the bus or leave, weren't promoted quickly enough, nearly drowned. They're all actually negative instances. I mean, obviously I've got positive ones as well, but
of course,
I think the negative ones are the ones that cause the bigger ripple, and then you have to do something about it.
Yeah, and they're a test of resilience, aren't they? Sometimes you don't know how you're going to react until you're actually faced with something. And it's, as you said, getting back in the water, getting back on the horse. You talked in our conversation that we had before about the power of casual conversations and a martial arts pickup moment. Can you tell us about that? Because I love this story.
When I started working for myself, get all the great advice, don't give anything away for free, build up your targeting and do everything I'm meant to be doing because I'm trained to do so. So I'd say most of my clients have come from some level of personal connection, but not in an obvious way. And the martial arts one actually is my newest client. So I'm working for a chain of schools. Pre-COVID, my son was doing martial arts classes and I got chatting to one of the other dads who was there waiting for his daughter. We'd see each other for an hour once a week and we just got chatting. Haven't seen the guy or spoken to him in 5-6 years. And then I got a phone call from this school chain who said, Raj has introduced you. He said, if you don't remember, mention martial arts. He's very friendly with the CEO and that led to a project. But that was probably the most random one. But equally, I had a friend who I play a dice game with called Perudo. Bump into a friend of his on a train, get talking about marketing, and I've been working for them for nearly 3 years. It's the organic and the little things. And actually, they're not even arguably my ripples. Someone else's ripple, and I've ended up in the stream, and then I get picked along with the current, and therefore you go. But it's like...
Yeah, but you clearly said something to impress him for him to recommend you for a role. This is the thing, you never know the conversations you're having. Like, I've been working with an agency, and they were recommended to me by someone that I embarrassingly didn't even remember. I'd gone out for lunch with my sister and it was her colleague. And I met her once. This was probably like 6 or 7 years ago, similar to your story. And she recommended me to this agency for this role. But I was like, I had no idea what I said to this lady for her to recommend me for a role. I'd never met her. But you never know the ripple impact of a conversation, right? And that conversation that you had at martial arts, and there you go.
And I'm a believer that you never burn your bridges and you put your good vibes out. People at the beginning said you don't give away any information. People should pay for that. And I found that really difficult. I'm going to tell you what I think. If you can then go away and do it without me, then you probably don't need me anyway. And if you need advice and I can help you, then so be it. So many example conversations that you end up giving a mini consultancy session because, you're in marketing. I had it at lunch the other day. And the guy's like, I'm brewing my own beer on the side and I need to do, like,
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So that's been really good for me. I think in 10 years, I've only ever had one cold inbound client, but everything else has come from some level of connection, and most of them have been slightly abstract.
Yeah. And you never know, that side hustle of the guy brewing his own beer may become a huge business, and you've been there for part of it, and who they're going
Exactly.
to call when they need. I love
Yeah.
that. My dad always used to say, never burn your bridges. It is excellent advice for anyone. And I think as well, there's a positive thing of don't burn your bridges. It's also rebuild your bridges as well. There's people that you haven't seen for decades, but you can have such a great working relationship with them, even if you've not seen them for such a long time. That the power of a network is just incredible.
Absolutely.
We talked last time about those invisible ripples and how actually ripples can keep going way, way past you've left the pond, right? And you were mentioning how you help people grow and helping others to grow and the ripple impact of leading a team. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually been quite an interesting experience. I've always been fortunate to have some really good bosses and people to work for, so I was taught in the right way. I've also worked alongside or seen the experiences of people where their managers are taking credit. They're the ones who go into the boardroom and present, even though they didn't do the work. And I've never been built that way, and I actually think it's quite disappointing. That's what happens when you become a fractional CMO. In my case, is I'm not in the business, right? So I'm not there 5 days a week. I'm not really a part of the senior team. I'm not paid in the same way as other people. And from a CEO point of view, often that means they come to me and say, you're partly on the outside. Give us your genuine views.
Yeah.
But it means from a team point of view that I'm not competing with them. So I'm genuinely trying to empower them. I know that my role is only going to last 18 months. And my job is to make them as strong as possible with the right teams, the right people, the right processes, the right structures, the right toolkits, etc. So that if you imagine they're little ripples, when I've gone and I'm on to the next thing, that those ripples are multiplying and growing and really helping to build the team and the people. And ripples multiply through other people. So the people that you've empowered, the teams that you've built, the clients that you help go on to create other ripples. So lots of my clients ultimately recommend me to other clients. That's where the business comes from. Working well with them helps me personally from a ripple point of view.
Yeah.
It helps the people that I've worked with from a ripple point of view to see and grow. And I love seeing people that I've helped go on to senior roles somewhere else. I just think it's really exciting and it's very empowering. Ultimately, it's quite exciting. One other example is, and I'm not plugging my book, by the way, but I did write a book and I've got most of the copies in my loft in a box. So it's not exactly a New York Times bestseller, unlike some of your other guests, but it's more about why I wrote the book that I think is interesting. So I wrote a book called Making Business Child's Play, but the idea was stemmed from having children. So the ripple was I had my daughter, then I had my son. And what I found was I'd go into work and I'd be doing stuff and then I'd go home and the same exact stuff, different subject matter, same stuff. And I'd find that, I was being out negotiated by a 3-year-old, even though I've got negotiation training and I just won a big negotiation at work and then the 3-year-old has destroyed me. And I was looking at it and comparing it. And I'm thinking they're born with these things that we obviously lose and then get retrained on. So I wrote a book, and one of the examples was preparing for a new arrival. That was chapter 1. How often would you start in a new company or see someone start? They don't have a desk, they don't have a computer, they've got no induction plan, there's no onboarding process, etc. I mean, could you imagine bringing a child home with no cot, no milk, no clothes, no bed? It wouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So why do we treat it differently? The same is true of all these different things, from negotiation skills to leadership skills. We encourage our children, for example, and you're now a stepmom of twin girls, to try new things. So constantly we are encouraging them, try stuff, fail at stuff, succeed at stuff, build, grow, etc. Then you look at that from a team point of view at work, and we try and keep people in boxes. You are the so-and-so, therefore you must stay here and do X. Whereas actually, in order for people to grow and develop, we need to give them new experiences. And I don't think we do that brilliantly at work. People get their subject matter and that's where they stay, which is completely different to everything outside of work. So for me, the ripple was having children and then trying to apply that nurturing thinking into my work environment, which then takes you back to the kind of empowerment of teams that says, I want to give you the tools to build and grow.
I love the 3-year-old negotiation power. But the beauty of what a 3-year-old does, right, that they pull on the emotional heartstrings. And I think that's often what we forget about in marketing and storytelling and advertising, right? It's about pulling on the emotional heartstrings. And actually 3-year-olds do it brilliant. 12-year-olds do it too in a very different way.
They do. But actually, as a couple of other quick examples, high initial demands is a really good negotiation technique. Children do that brilliantly. What do you want for Christmas? A pony, right? Then we can't have a pony, we can have a PlayStation. Then it sounds all right because comparison to a pony,
Yeah, they've set the bar high.
it's not so bad. That's actually a trained technique. The other one is tantrums. How often have you worked with somebody that you think, if I present this to them, they're going to lose their you know what, so I won't even try it because I know they're going to say no? That is effectively adult work tantrum. The same way you think, oh, if I do this, my kid's going to go mental, I'll try and avoid it. So there's so many analogies that you can bring out, but it's quite worrying, actually, that effectively what I'm saying is that most people at work are toddlers, I think is what I'm saying. But,
there we go. That's the headline for the podcast clip.
Yeah, maybe cut that.
You're going to make a lot of friends doing that. So for anyone listening who's standing at the edge of their own ripple and they're not sure whether to take a leap or not, what would you say to them?
Tricky, right? Easier said than done. I would say try not to overthink it. Go with your gut instinct. Chuck the stone in and see what happens. I think most people are afraid that if they make the decision and it's wrong, they can't change it. But you can always change again, right? I'm not sure whether to take that job. If you take the job and don't like it, you can leave. It's not the end of the world. So I'd say chuck in the stone, see what happens. When I look back at my career, so many of the best things came from something that was uncertain, out of my comfort zone. And you have to take some sort of small, brave step, whether you're pushed into it or you choose to take it. I don't think you have to have it all mapped out. I think that you need maybe some vague idea of direction and trust that even a little ripple can take you somewhere that you didn't expect to go.
Yeah, and follow your passion, right, as well. Because if your heart's
possible.
in it, you're going to be a lot more committed and engaged.
But sometimes you do have to feed the children and do the stuff that, puts the meals on the table. So
yeah. And finally, we're calling our wonderful guests like yourself wave makers, because clearly you've been making waves in the industry and with the clients that you're working with. What one piece of advice would you give to aspiring wave makers?
One piece of advice, that's
tricky.
tricky.
It just has to be one.
I've got quite a few, but the one I'd say is probably fundamentally don't be a dick. That's the one piece of advice that I think stays with me the most.
Great.
There was an analogy of, I don't know who told me, it was about a monkey tree, so a tree full of monkeys. And it was basically, if you are at the top of the tree and you're looking down, what you see smiling up at you is a load of smiling, chattering faces. When you're at the bottom of the tree looking up, the view is very different. So as you grow the corporate ladder, don't be an arsehole was basically the moral of this monkey tree story. Overall, I'd say, if I could broaden it from one, stay curious and be human. Best ideas don't come out of the boardroom. They come up in everyday conversations on the sidelines of a football pitch or a martial arts class, a coffee with a friend, a dinner with your sister. Listen more than you talk. Not my finest strength, I accept. Don't be afraid to try something new, even if it's a small thing. Remember, hence the don't be a dick bit, that real impact comes from genuine connections, not just clever campaigns. So if you focus on making a difference for real people, the ripples and the waves will follow.
I love that. It's beautiful. It's not one, but you can have it because it was so good.
One's hard.
It's really hard, isn't it? I know, but I think this is the thing, it's so overwhelming sometimes for people, whether you're in a corporate role or you want to start your own business. Sometimes it's so overwhelming, and trying to get to that one piece of advice that would help guide people, I think, is tough. So it's purposely a little bit mean and a little bit tough.
Can I give you one final thought?
Yeah, of course.
One of my big frustrations in the marketing industry, as someone who feels they were trained properly through FMCG, etc., is the industry is actually full of people who, in my opinion, don't understand marketing. So they've ended up in a role because probably they focused in on Instagram and now they're a digital marketing person. So my actual one piece of advice for people in that industry is get some core training, whether that's a CIM qualification, the mini MBA with Mark Ritson. Get an understanding of segmentation, targeting, and positioning, and worry less about tactics and more about the customer. Because everything we've talked about today in terms of ripples starts with an understanding of who are you targeting, your brand champion, how are they going to be motivated, where do you engage with them? And so if you start with the tactic, because that's where you're an expert, you are going to limit your ability to grow in your career. So that to me is probably my biggest advice for anyone starting out or any stage in their career. And also, don't try and attribute everything. It's a recipe for disaster.
And also, it's a word of caution as well for brand owners too. Don't just follow the latest tactic. Make sure your strategy is really strong and really solid. And then you will know the tactics to follow and the ones not to. Because this is sometimes where brands get really schizophrenic because they just follow the latest new shiny thing. And just because it's cool or it's trending or whatever, without really understanding, does this align to my vision, my strategy, my brand, my purpose, and is this going to help me or is this just going to distract?
Exactly. I liken it always to young children playing football. They just all follow the ball.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's basically what happens. So yeah, try
Yeah,
and
those
avoid
are
that.
great videos. That's a good analogy.
And interesting, as they grow up and they learn to play, they hold their positions and
Mm,
there's much more space on the field and they all play better. You can learn a lot from outside of
yeah.
the one thing you're focused on. But yeah, that was my final thought for you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Well, Adam, thank you. This conversation reminds us that not every ripple is loud and not every opportunity arrives in the big shiny moments and the big splashes. And sometimes it's the quiet chats and the gut feelings and the chance encounters that can set off waves, and that not always ripples are very visible. You've talked about teams and the impact you have on people and then the ripple impact that they go on to make. It's been a really powerful conversation. Thank you for sharing your ripple stories with us. For everyone listening, remember, even the tiniest ripple can spark really big change. Stay open and stay curious. This is a wrap on this episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wavemaker guests. I'm Laura Barber. This is The Ripple Impact. Adam Margolin, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to chat to you as ever. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.